So what are people going to say about us in 50 years? That we aborted 1 million fetuses a year? Many of us, maybe 20,000 who were viable in the ninth month, more so in the last 3 months. Are they going to say that you had 1 million people defecating, urinating, fornicating, and injecting on the streets of your major cities? Is that what they're going to say?
Hello, ladies. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. I'm Jack Fowler, the host. You're here to listen to VDH, Victor Davis Hanson, the star and namesake. He is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College, and the possessor of a very important website, The Blade of Perseus. VictorHanson.com is the address. You should be going there. You should be subscribing. I'll tell you why later in this episode, why you should. And we are recording on the Ides of March, Saturday, March 15th. And this particular episode will be up on March 20th, Thursday, March 20th. We hope when this airs that Victor is alive and well.
I'm going to write a will before I leave Monday.
Oh, well.
I have one, but I'll have to update it.
Okay.
I don't want to end up, you know what we were saying? My wife and I were here. So we were saying that we were the Hackmans. We're out in an isolated thing together, right? And no one's been checking on us, so.
Well, have your children. No one lives particularly close.
My daughter calls me every day.
Maybe your brother in the area can come by.
No, I don't think my siblings are worried about me.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Victor, we're going to do a lot of higher ed analysis today from you. We've got some interesting articles I've come across. One is by J.P. Gans. He's writing this for World, which is the big Protestant magazine, and it's about what he calls the self-inflicted academic crisis. And I'll read a little bit about that, and we'll get your thoughts on that and plenty other things, including, say, this Hamas-loving woke professor at Columbia University taxing college endowments, the staggering number of communist Chinese students in America. And maybe we'll have some time to get off colleges, talk about Gavin Newsom, who's competing with us with podcasts, with conservative leaders.
And he's doing it with the help of Charlie Kirk and Michael Savage and Steve Bannon.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Well, we'll get your thoughts on all these things, Victor, when we come back from these important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor, J.P. DeGans, who runs a very important nonprofit. It's called Communio, but he wrote this piece for World, and it's titled A Self-Inflicted Academic Crisis, Our University's Career-First, Family-Last Ideology Fuels Their Own Collapse. And here's how it begins. Our collapsing fertility rate has become a matter of increasing interest to the elite thinkers such as Elon Musk and many others. A key intellectual source of this fertility collapse is academia. Secular liberal universities and colleges have incubated anti-family, anti-marriage, and anti-child rearing thought. Ironically, these ideas are now leading to the destruction of the very institutions that advance them first, as admission officials begin to reach the demographic cliff. The demographic cliff, Victor, by the way, is starting this year. The free fall in, shall we call it, reproduction that stems from 2008, that lack of students, that this would be their freshman year in college, and many colleges are scrambling. Where are they going to get students? Layered on top of that, Victor, as you know, many people are like, why do I have to go to college anymore, et cetera. So anyway, very interesting article. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, they're absolutely right. For all practical purposes, the universities, especially the elite ones, and that can be private and public, but they tend to be private. I'm talking about the Ivy League or the Seven Sisters undergraduate or Stanford, things like that. they're all, I mean, when you look at political donations, they usually go up 90 to 95% to Democrats. If you look at the zip codes at Stanford on voting, it's usually 90% to the Democratic candidate. Then when you look at the Bill of Rights, there is really no First Amendment. They keep, what I don't understand is there's all these people that are complaining that Mr. Khalil has been denied his First Amendment rights. He can say whatever he wants. That's not the problem. The problem is he's distributing, promoting a terrorist entity, and he is negotiating on the part, and he is one of the spokesmen for this apartheid group at Columbia that has taken over 2 halls and has committed $30,000 in damage. And when you have the president of Barnard blasting his group, and there's going to be suspensions. But my point is, why don't they talk about freedom of speech if they really believe in it when a speaker is shouted down? Why didn't they come out and say Judge Duncan had a perfect right to speak his mind at Stanford Law School rather than to be shouted down and people yell at him, "We hope your daughter is raped"? Or why, when Ben Shapiro came to Stanford, why were people plastering the university with these posters that said "Ben be gone" with a picture of a raid can, as if he was a Jew to be sprayed away in Zyklon B or something? So they don't protect freedom of speech. They don't honor the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment. So if you're on a campus and you go out on a date and you are a male and a young woman in a he said, she said environment says that you took advantage of her sexually and you say, "No, I didn't." Maybe he was a cad, he didn't reciprocate with kind talk in the next week or so after a sexual congress. I don't know, but the point is he will not be allowed an attorney. He will not be allowed cross-examination. He will not be allowed to see his accuser in a court. He doesn't have any constitutional protections. Ask Joe Lonsdale what happened to him at Stanford. And then they violate the 1964 and 1965 Civil Rights Acts, Jack. How in the world did we get to a point where you could have an auxiliary subsidiary graduation ceremony based on race? I remember when it happened at Cal State Fresno, the Chicano graduation. What was the purpose of that? What was the purpose of it? And only people of a particular race there. And there was the Asian graduation, there was the gay, there was a black. If they'd had a white graduation, people, and that was the minority when I was at Cal State Fresno, people would have gone crazy, and they should go crazy. But the point I'm making is they have racially separate dorms, and they call them theme houses. They have racially separated safe spaces where people of particular races can't go on campus, just like Jim Crow, only they think they're liberal, so you can't use that simile. And at particular universities, you can pick the racial profile of your potential roommate in a university dorm. This is all in addition to the fact that they have been charging not the Bill Gates Foundation, not private vacations, 50, 60% overhead on individual faculty grants or team grants. I'm talking about 55 to 60% charging the National Science Foundation or the National Institutes of Health and skimming that money off. And that is in addition to these multi-billion-dollar endowments that give you 6-7% multi-million-dollar tax-free income when they're not nonpartisan. And so now they're looking at a crisis, and they are in crisis mode. They're anti-Semitic. We just had a 900-page investigative report at Stanford University by mostly liberal professors, and they found systemic, if I could use that term, anti-Semitism across the board at Stanford University. And we are going to lose about $200 million if we have to abide by what we charge private foundation, just 15% overhead, and can't gouge the government anymore. And should the House and Senate reconcile on somewhere between 15, 10, or 20%, tax on endowments, and Stanford would lose another $300 million. And so at a time when people are saying this is a dangerous, if I'm a Jewish student, this is a dangerous place to be on a elite campus, because they will not or cannot discipline radical pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Palestinian protesters who think they have a perfect right. They just did it yesterday at Cornell. Friday. They went into a Cornell seminar on the Middle East. Former Ambassador Crocker was there. He was moderating, and they disrupted it. And they've done it. They just did it to Larry Summers at Stanford. A group came in and disrupted him. But they feel that they alone can do that, and there's no consequences. And the university won't enforce their own rules. And then the other thing, very quickly, Jack, is that in the hysteria post-George Floyd, most of the major universities suspended the SAT or ACT exam, and they suspended the comparative ranking of high school GPAs. So they let in people who were not, according to their own prior standards, qualified. At Stanford University, they put on their website, I have no way of knowing, they let in about 9% of white males who make up about 30 to 35% of the population. So they were saying to themselves, we demanded the SAT of you, and we ranked you, Victor. So if you were applying from Selma High School with your 4.0, it wasn't the same as Palo Alto's 4.0. Okay, I get it. It probably wasn't. But the reason they were doing that all these years is because they said the following. I'm just taking Stanford. I'm not picking on it as an example. We have a rigorous general education program. Science, math, Western Civ, history, philosophy, seminal text, exegesis required, and deep thought, papers. And the only people who can do this rigorous work are those with a certain SAT or GPA from an accredited top-ranked high school. Now, our curriculum is necessary, and we're not going to have grade inflation because we have to impress law school, Harvard Law School, Yale Law School, Duke Medical School, I don't know, Ford Motor Company, DuPont. All of these hires have to know if you get branded with a Stanford BA or you're going to graduate program, it reflects the top-notch quality aptitude that you had. And we're not Cal State Fresno, where Victor's from. And so then they threw it all away. And within 4 years, you would get employers saying, hey, I got this guy from Stanford, and we hired him. He's not only obnoxious, but he doesn't know anything. He's not analytical. He can't write very well. He speaks poorly. How did he get through? And so that's happening right now. So what do? They just quietly started, kind of, sort of, we're going to quietly reinstate the racist ACT and the ultra-racist SAT and the ultra-racist comparative examination of GPAs by the quality of their high school. So that's who they are, and we saw Claudine Gayne and the rest of them that knew that they were institutionalized anti-Semitism, and they thought nobody would care because the Jewish community puts a high price, elite education. They'd always give money. They would always support them. They could always lie to them. There's no anti-Semitism on campus. And also foreign students. It was the idea is that the United States has no standards. The universities hate the United States as much as we do. We're just going to come over from Gaza or Syria or Morocco or Algeria. We're going to enroll, and then we're going to start protesting and supporting terrorist causes. And if you don't like it, we'll say you're depriving me of my First Amendment rights. Get used to it. That was their attitude. And now people are saying it's non-sustainable. When you get people like Elon Musk or Bill Ackman or Mark Andreessen, and they all say, you know what? These places are toxic. And they teach a certain creed that does not lead people to happy lives. And it attacks the nuclear family, it attacks fertility, it attacks traditions, it attacks patriotism. And we don't want to put up with it anymore. So if They said to Hillsdale College, you're too conservative, you're too patriotic, you're too traditional, you're too analytical. Don't take money from us. And they said, fine, we're not going to take money from you. Well, why don't they do the same thing? They just said, you know what? We don't take your stupid dollars. We at Stanford want to be Stanford. We don't want any federal money. We have a $30 billion endowment. Harvard can say, we have over a $50 billion endowment. Take your stupid cash. We don't need no badges. Just, that's it. And they don't do that. So they want the money, but they don't want to abide by any basic standards of decency. And I've been at a lot of universities. I've probably spoken at over 200 or 300 in the last 50 years. I've traveled on university lecture series. I've been given honorary degrees. I've given graduation talks. And I come to the conclusion at 71 that I'm not sure that on a plus minus evaluation, cost benefit analysis, that they are a force for good. I think the engineering and the science and the math is critical, but when I look at the GE, I don't see that very many of them, where the professors are teaching Shakespeare or Hegel or Socrates, Plato. I don't see that at all. I just don't see it happening. To the degree they are, it's always negative. It always is. And people are just tired of it. They don't want to send their kid off to college at 18 and pay $100,000 and have him come back at Thanksgiving and say, I didn't know you were a white settler oppressor. They don't need that in their lives, especially from this neurotic bunch of academics.
In this piece by J.P. DeGance, he said that as of now, there are 900 feminist studies programs in colleges in America. You take how many kids are in them now, times every year, go back 30, 40 years. There's an army of feminists out there who are part of his article. Obviously, the point of his article are role of depopulating America.
I dealt with them my entire life. I once had a student, I won't tell you very much about her, but I was very young and she was a very nice student. She had 3 children. She wanted to come back and get a minor in classics, and I think she was separated or divorced. So she approached me in class and said, I have no money. She came into my office to tell me this with her 3 children. So she said, is there any way I could leave my 3 children in your office while you're teaching? And I said, no. And she said, just give me a week or 2. So I did. And she was a very nice person. I come back, my office was full of kids. I talked to them, and then she did get something. And she was very bright. And gosh, she was working a full-time job, single mom, and very bright. And then she got into women's studies. So I forgot all about her. About 8 years later, this person comes into my office with her women's studies advisor. She has almost a butch haircut. And she tells me that she felt that my classes were sexist, and she felt that I was part of a paradigm, and she felt that I said things in class about Western civilization that were, and this other woman was beaming, her advisor, who, between you and me, seemed very gay and was trying to tell this woman that she might be ambiguous. And I listened to about 5 minutes, and I looked at my watch, and I said, are you done? And she said, no. And I said, I'm done, and I just have a polite recommendation. Do not ever come into my office again. Do not see me. Do not say hello. Do not say goodbye. You are an ingrate. I tutored you. I let your children stay in my office. And I've had that about 4 or 5 times with the university people. And it's always the same thing, Jack, when I look back at 21 years in the CSU system. It was always somebody who was very earnest and very bright and very idealistic, and they were coming back to school. And there were 2 typologies. One was what I would call the DEI type. That was they were Hispanic, Hmong, or African American. And they would come in and they were so excited about Homer's Iliad or the Spartans at Thermopylae or Dante's Inferno, all these classes that I would teach, and they were wonderful kids. And then they would either, one of two things would happen. They would get their minor in classics, or they would gravitate to another psych major, sociology major, or they would stay in classics, and we would really make them competitive. We'd say, if you want to go get a law degree, we might want to get an MA for a year. You might want to learn French and German. You might want to learn how to write Latin and Greek. We did all of this. Our team did, 4 professors. And I would say in 50% of the cases, the longer these students went to graduate school after their BA or MA, or the people who had minored and went into other programs, I would bump into them, and they would come back and want a recommendation for graduate school or a fellowship, and they were completely unrecognizable. They would come back and say, I was thinking about Achilles, and you were just so tied into the patriarchy. And these are people who didn't even know who Achilles was 5 years ago or 4 years ago. Or, would you please give me a recommendation because I'm applying for the diversity action officer at Cal State, such. And they had all this lingo. And every case, there was no sense of gratitude that they had come out of and that we were not political. We were trying to give them this broad educational background. I had one kid who was really brilliant. He dropped out 3 times. I tutored him, got him into graduate school twice. He dropped out once, got him in again. And next time I saw him, he was giving me an indictment about my Western civilization, racist, sexist stuff. So at that point, that was one of the reasons I retired at 49 actually. From teaching, I went to the Hoover Institution. I thought, you know what? There is such institutional bias, and these young, impressionable minds, once they figure out where the power, the money, the influence, the heft is in these university campuses, they understand that the path of least resistance is to be very left-wing, and mouth all of these shibboleths. And I just said, you know what? It's not worth it anymore.
I had enough.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, but every once in a while I'll be in Fresno. I must have had 4 or 5. I had 8 classes with. I had to average 200 students a semester for a semester.
Like for 20 years.
400 for 8,000 students, and I remember most of them. And I tutored. I probably gave every semester I was teaching 4, and then Bruce Thornton and I, my colleague, would teach an overload, 5 preps, separate preps, 200 students, and then 4 or 5 or 6 independent studies for students so they could get their major or their individual minor or whatever. But the point is, in the years that followed, a lot of those people that I would write recommendations for, help get public, you name it, I would bump into. And I would say 50% were completely flipped over to be hard left and had the whole, especially after the DEI thing. And they were, because most of my students were minority students, women, either women or minority students, or they were very poor whites from the Oklahoma diaspora. But my point is that this university is insidious, and they would sell them on this bill of goods. They would say, I'm teaching now Latin in high school, or I'm teaching this in junior high, and I have a curriculum where I'm talking about the theft of the American Southwest. And I'd say, from whom? Well, the United States stole it from Mexico. And I said, well, where did Mexico get it? From indigenous people. And which indigenous people got it from the other indigenous people? And is this tragedy you're teaching them? Or so I just got to the point that I said, no, and at that point, the last 30 years, you just you're not in academia anymore. You don't want anything to do with it. And I just dropped out of. It's a negative force in American life. I really believe that. And I hate to say that because I was a big proponent of higher education.
Well, you're a big proponent of good higher education. Victor, a couple of things about what your exegesis. I wasn't going to call it a rant this time. Segregation, you didn't use that word, but that's essentially, you're talking about things at college that are segregation. It's funny how that word has kind of disappeared from.
I use it a lot. It's segregationist. I mean, if you can have a dorm and only one particular race is allowed to be in it, or you can allow students to say, I don't want that student to be my roommate because of his or her race, or I can't go to this graduation ceremony because I'm not of that particular race, or I can't go to that section of the library. What is it? It's segregation, and they understand that, and they think they've turned the world upside down. So if you want to thing and you're reading, I don't know, Catcher in the Rye or Kill a Mockingbird, and then you say we're going to have a trigger warning, and you attack the dead author and say this was illiberal. Basically, what's the biggest problem that academia has is that it's not training people in math, science, literature, history, analytical thought, inductive thought. So the students are not very well educated, but at the same is occurring, they're arrogant because they've been told that through therapeutic curricula, that their job is to use the standards of the present affluent leisured society and go back and trash the very university that is hosting them and make fun of their traditions, their racists, their sexist, prior professors, their courses, to tear down statues, rename things. But they never say to themselves, well, history is kind of ironic. So what are people going to say about us in 50 years? That we aborted 1 million fetuses a year? Many of us, maybe 20,000 who were viable in the 9th month, more so in the last 3 months. Are they going to say that you had 1 million people defecating, urinating, fornicating, and injecting on the streets of your major cities? Is that what they're going to say? So the point I'm making is they're very arrogant, and they think that their own standards won't not apply to them, and they will. So that's my biggest beef with them. And it's very sad to see arrogance and ignorance at a young age, to be so strident. Like all these Palestinian people, this is a true story. When I was walking in November of 2023, we had this encampment at Stanford, and it was violating all the rules. You were not allowed to be sleeping out in the quad for 24 hours. They even had a sign as you walk by, Jack, that said, "Be quiet, don't disturb sleeping protesters and their tents." And so these people would come out and hand you things, and they were saying, river to the sea, and this is kind of a stereotype. And of course, they didn't know which river in most cases, Jordan River. I don't think they'd ever knew where the Jordan River is if you asked them. I said to one of them, so the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free. How are you going to free up the Red Sea? And she said, the Red Sea? And I said, yeah, the Red Sea. And she says, what do you mean? I said, well, you said the river to the sea. What sea did you mean? I thought she was going to say, idiot, the Mediterranean Sea, but of course she didn't. She had no idea about which river, which sea, and they don't know anything about the partition, or they don't know anything about what is Transjordan. They don't know anything about the 67, 73 Yom Kippur. They know nothing about any of that. And yet they get there, and on those soapboxes, they scream and yell and say all of these things. And it's really sad to see these students that are so unimpressive. And I'm not just saying I love students, but my gosh, it's a waste of time almost to talk to them these days, because they don't read and they don't think for themselves, and they're not taking courses.
Dan, our mutual friend, my great friend Dan Mahoney, who taught a lot, more recently than you did, and Dan, I think he stopped teaching at Assumption in about 2020, 2021. And the decline in the knowledge base of the students was very obvious from what he was teaching at the end to what he was teaching 20 years earlier. And the arrogance, as you say, just upped and he had enough. just had enough. I mean, who needs this crap if you can do
I
other
know.
things?
I mean, it's just, I was 21. I went to Stanford University in the classics PhD program, and I walked in to see a German. First of all, they were all Europeans. And I said, I'd like to take your philosophy. And she pulled out a random book from her thing and said, read this. It was Lysias's On the Cripple. I did it pretty well. And then she said, I'm teaching a composition class. I want you to take it. And the next thing I knew, she whipped out a paragraph in English. She said, write. And that was what everybody did. And the idea that you'd eliminate that from the classics curriculum as undergraduate, how would you ever be able to study the ancient world? And that was just in this tiny, irrelevant little field. And think about what they have done throughout, out a whole group of English majors that doesn't know much about the Shakespearean plays. They don't know who Alexander Pope is. They don't have ever read a word of Milton. And they don't know anything. And they don't know about the inductive method. And yet they're so loud and yet they're so poorly educated. And when you do meet people like the Hillsdale students or some of the Pepperdine students, or you meet some of the conservative students at Stanford that deliberately take the few traditional classes, they have an elan about them, and you talk to them, and it's like, Victor, please don't tell anybody how easy these courses are, because it's just a joke. Yeah. We study. Stanford gave almost 80% of all of their courses A's.
Yeah.
A's.
Same thing in Harvard. Same,
Who wants to die on the altar of standards? Because if you do, I don't know what'll happen now with the DEI auditors are out, supposedly, but they did check to see if there was a systemic racist pattern in faculty grading. That meant if you were teaching a class and the university had changed the entrance requirements and suddenly you got students that weren't able to do the work that you yourself thought was commiserate with Yale or Harvard or Princeton or Duke or whatever, and you had to grade accordingly, and you did that enough, then you were going to be in big trouble. So then you gave people A's.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about one of these woke Black Lives Matter type of professors at Columbia. We've got some other academic-related topics, Gavin Newsom, and we're going to get to some of these things when we come back from these important messages. We'll get back to the show in a minute, but first let's talk about something that's affecting all of us. The dollar isn't as stable as it once was. Interest payments on our national debt now exceed our entire military budget, and if you're paying attention, you know traditional retirement strategies might not be enough anymore. That's why we want to tell you about American Alternative Assets. They specialize in helping investors diversify with gold, a physical asset that's preserved wealth for centuries while paper currencies have come and gone. What makes American Alternative Assets different is their simplicity. You can transfer funds from your existing retirement accounts, 401ks, or IRAs. No taxes, no penalties. If you're ready to explore gold as part of your retirement strategy, call 1-888-615-8047 or visit VictorLovesGold.com and use the code VICTOR and claim your free wealth protection guide. That's 1-888-615-8047 or visit VictorLovesGold.com and use the code VICTOR and claim your wealth protection guide that they're offering to all our listeners. We're back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show, recording on March 15th. This episode is up on Thursday, March 20th. Victor has a website, The Blade of Perseus. If you're a fan of Victor's writings, go there. And you'll find tons of free stuff, links to Victor's articles, American Greatness essays, weekly syndicated column, archives of these books, links to his various appearances. Then there will be ultra items 3 times a week, twice as articles, once as a video. Victor does things exclusively for The Blade of Perseus. You should subscribe. It's $65 a year, discounted from $650 a month. The web address again is victorhanson.com. And by the way, if you're on X, Victor writes maybe every week, every 10 days or so, kind of a screed, a rant, a great one. And that's at VD Hanson is his handle there. We have the Victor Davis Hanson fan club on Facebook. Good friends, good people. Victor, what did I want? Oh, gratitude. Just quickly before we move on to other topics, it's interesting. I mean, you mix with all people, all things, all ways in your life, various social institutions, etc. But ingratitude is the mark of academia. Yes,
that is the worst trait of all time.
yeah.
I think it is ingratitude. I know it's different than loyalty, disloyalty. It's an inability to see how it has helped you, who didn't need to help you, and necessarily might not even have liked you, but felt the principle was important. And I would say that the people I owe the most to as professors were all left-wing, but they were disinterested and they were fair. And I owe so much to people like John Lynch, or Mary Kay Gamble or Gary Miles, or all these professors I had at UC Santa Cruz who are all people of the left. But I never heard any bias from them as far as students went. They loved students. They had really strict standards. It was really amazing. I mean, gosh, I turned in a paper and John Lynch once wrote and said, "If you don't stop splitting infinities, I'm going to you, Victor." So it was
That
a
is
joke.
that's a conquerable habit, splitting infinitives.
I know
Hey,
it, but
Victor, I want to bring up this Columbia teacher, but just first, you mentioned Khalil before, the pinup boy now for the left. There's a story in today's Post that he worked for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the infamous UNRWA, who had any number of its employees involved in the October 7th massacre of Israelis. So I don't think it's any surprise.
He knows what he did. He was proud of it. Anger is that somebody called him on it. And Marco Rubio has been superb. Marco Rubio, he has been absolutely right. He just makes the same argument. If Mr. Khalil had been honest, and when he applied for a original student visa and then a converted work visa, had he just said, given us his affiliations and what he intended to do when he got to the United States, that is, head the pro-Hamas apartheid divest student group that was responsible for thousands of dollars of damage and takeover. If he had just said that, we would have not invited him. It has nothing to do with free speech. If he was a guy who just was going to class, he never broke a rule, and every once in a while he went to a protest on behalf of Palestine, maybe, and nobody cares that. But being that for a State Department designated terrorist group and being involved in appeasing or defending people who had used violence and promotion of the October 7th massacres, our Constitution, as proverbially referred to, is not a suicide pact. Because if you take the left's position, Jack, is you have to let in anybody with any views whatsoever to your country. Anybody. But we know that they don't believe that, because if they were a apartheid, racist, Ku Klux Klaner version in Europe and they came, we wouldn't let them in. So it's the left. It's always one way with them. Always one way.
Now, beneath every double standard is a single standard, as the great Joe Sobran used to say. Victor, Columbia University, which was already mentioned, that's where Khalil has done some of his agitating. There's a piece again in today's New York Post, Saturday the 15th, by Chris Rufo and Hannah Grossman. I'm sure folks know who Chris Rufo is. He and Hannah Grossman actually now working and writing for the Manhattan Institute, which Victor, you're a contributing editor to their magazine, City
I
Journal.
used to write a lot. I haven't written. I've been too busy with my other obligations, but it's a wonderful venue.
Oh, City Journal it's a quarterly, and Brian Anderson is the editor. Brian's just the loveliest man on the planet, and I think he's the editor. I think it's the best magazine in America. But anyway, Chris and Hannah write a piece that the Post picks up. A woke prof fuels Ivy hate, race studies kook aided in campus chaos in this race studies coup is a neuropsychologist, Jennifer J. Manley. She took part directly in these anti-Israeli protests on Columbia, and she gets a ton of federal money for grants on much of her research is based on the so-called social determinants of health thesis, which posits that racism, sexism, and homophobia can cause brain disease in Blacks and, I'm not going to say Latinx communities, a thesis that critics have described as pseudoscience. So she's a pseudoscientist. She somehow or other, Victor, she got tenure at an Ivy League college. How does
the Ivy League schools have less standards than the CSU system, and they know that, and that's what my point is. They're not worth it. You shouldn't send their kid there. They'll become indoctrinated. They will not be educated. They will feel entitled, and they will be exposed to some of the more obnoxious people in their entire lives they'll ever meet at the university campus. And these people, and then, the same thing in the National Institute of Health, when we talk about a 15% maximum surcharge, or we talk about maybe 30% in cuts, she's the type of person we're talking about. It's not just an act of commission that she's doing these things that are self-destructive, but we omit other people who have real scientific, they can't get a grant because it's this herd mentality, and that all of a sudden after George Floyd, if you said the word equity or diversity or inclusion or Black or Chicano, underserved communities, then you were going to get money for a pseudo project. But that meant that somebody who was trying to find the proper chemotherapy to treat head and neck cancer was not going to get it. So that was the problem. And that's true about everything. Every totalitarian ideology that seeks to be inclusive and holistic, and that means at all points of our lives, whether it's Federal Aviation Administration, air traffic controllers, what you start to superimpose this ideology and look at everything through the lens of race, then you don't have time enough to train, and you get exemptions. You can't say that I missed that plane because I'm Black. I can't say that I'm an underrepresented member of a gay community. It's just a commissar-like system, and there's no empirical analysis and evaluation, and it's forever. And people forget that. It's not just hiring people on the basis of DEI, it's forever. That person feels like they have an exemption. And we saw what happened in the South with white supremacy. If you were white and you were accorded a certain exemption, then it didn't help you at all. It ended up in mediocrity because you didn't have to be evaluated on the same standards as other people were.
Well, Victor mentioned before also taxing endowments, and I'm happy to see that at my old stomping grounds in U.S. National Review, there was a piece by Henry Olson titled "Tax the Ivies." Just read a little bit here quickly. It's rich that so many professors at these elite institutions argue for higher taxes on the wealthy, while they comfortably cash their paychecks from entities that are among the most tax-protected of any in the nation. And that's why Republican tax plan should include Texas Representative Troy Nell's Endowment Tax Fairness Act. That bill would raise the marginal tax rate on investment earnings on the endowments at very wealthy colleges and universities to 21%, the same rate paid by for-profit corporations, and that would raise a lot of money. The Tax Foundation estimates it would raise between $70 billion and $112 billion over 10 years. It's good for the goose, ought to be good for the gander. The nation needs more revenue in ways that won't harm the economy if it wants to reduce its gargantuan deficit. Taxing the left's postgraduate clerisy is a great place to start. That alone is an interesting idea.
It is. And I've been writing about that for a long time, to tax the income on endowments, but it'll also shut down a lot of these centers, the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, Climate Change, all of these things that were never there 20 years ago. So people have to ask themselves, if we go back in time to 1970 or 1975, just to take an example, do people really believe the people who graduated from Harvard, Yale, Princeton in 1975, 65, 55 were less educated than their counterparts today. I think everybody admits they were far better educated. So did all of these centers and these special programs and these dash studies classes that were all political or ideological or therapeutic, did they help? No. So if you were to cut them back by starving the beast and the universities couldn't afford them, somebody's going to say, well, Victor, they would just cut out the Shakespeare classes and still fund them. Maybe, maybe not. Another problem is that the donors don't get the money, so they feel they're giving money to their alma mater and it's going to help the prestige of the university and enhance their own degree from it or get their name in a building, but they can't really feed this monster. They have to be much more selective. And I think you're starting to see that, especially with Jewish American donors to the Ivy League. They're not just going to write a check anymore because they understand how it will be used.
Victor, before we head into the break for the final question, I just want to note, still on education front, I think I read this in Breitbart, huge number of Chinese in U.S. colleges. Rep. Riley Moore, who's from, I think, West Virginia, Republican of West Virginia, finds that there are 300,000 Chinese nationals in our university system. And one part of this article says there are 25% of New York University students are Chinese national. And his point is that there are some serious national security issues at the very least related to this. By the way, if there was some law passed to ban them, my gosh, that would cripple a lot of schools financially. I mean, they are counting on that money to come in.
Well, if 1%, the FBI had said that the figure, I think Christopher Wray said it was high. 1% of these Chinese nationals were actively engaged in espionage. Then you're talking about 3,000 students. And I've had a lot of Chinese students that have kind of admitted that when they go back to China, they're questioned, no matter whether they were actually actively spying. But when you look at the Chinese military today, and you look at its jets and its artillery, even its uniforms, its military academies, it's all borrowed from Western militaries. So where are they getting that expertise? They're either getting it from two places or both, from people in the United States sending them materials about our munitions and our protocols of military, or we're just educating all of these people that go back with that expertise. It's the same thing that Japan did at the turn of the century. They sent about 250,000 Japanese students to study nautical engineering in Britain and to study land warfare originally in France, and then after the Franco-Prussian War in Germany. When the Russian fleet, as we showed up in 1905, the Russian Baltic and Pacific fleets, they were shocked that the Japanese dreadnoughts were so much superior to the Russian because they had used Japanese new expertise in mechanical engineering and fabrication and had studied at British universities and were building carriers, cruisers, destroyers that were as good or better than Western, based on Western designs.
Well, Victor, we are going to head into the home stretch here. We'll talk about one of your favorite people ever, Gavin Newsom, and we'll do that when we come back from these final important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. My friend, we've recorded 2 shows today, and unfair to have been given what he's enduring here. But Victor, let's close out by I'm looking at a piece from Hot Air. The Gavin Newsom backlash is still building steam. Now, Newsom can't run for re-election as governor, but he's looking at 2028, right? So it's the only reason that everyone isn't talking about what a terrible week Gavin Newsom is having. This is the week that we have just passed. Is that people are too busy talking about what a terrible week Chuck Schumer is having. Still almost as many Democrats seem irritated and fed up with Newsom as with Schumer. The source of that irritation is Newsom's new podcast, where he has so far invited as guests Charlie Kirk, Michael Savage, and Steve Bannon. I wonder when he's going to ask Victor Davis Hanson to be a guest.
Yeah, I think I'm going to pass on that. I notice, though, he doesn't. I mean, Michael Savage I like Michael Savage. I've been on his show, but was a controversial talk show. Steve Bannon is, an ultra MAGA who's at war with many of the Trump-Musk wing of the MAGA movement. And Charlie Cook is a great guy, but he's a very, very conservative activist. But what I'm getting at is he's not asking some conservative authors. Why doesn't he have Larry Arngo on there, for example, as an example, or Shelby Steele, or somebody like that? And I think he's talking about operational or transactional politics, not the philosophy behind what is destroying the state. And I listened to some of them, but what I'm getting at is I didn't get these types of questions. Question 1, Gavin. The California people approved a $7.5 billion bond, $3 to $4 billion of it was to build 3 huge reservoirs. You did not build them at the site in the Sacramento River, the Los Banos Grande site, nor the Temperance Flat. But you did use $250,000 to blow up 4 dams on the Klamath River. Why did you do that when they were providing clean energy, flood control, recreation, and irrigation? Question 2. Jerry Brown gave us high-speed rail, but what is your plan from the Bakersfield to Merced 170-mile road to Noah? And it's cost probably $15 to $20 billion. It will lose $1 billion a year. What is the ultimate? 700 miles still? Is it 300, $400 billion? What are you propose we do that? At the time you're doing this, the 99 lateral, the 101 lateral, and the I-5 lateral are all, in many places, just 2 lanes in either direction. They are some of the most dangerous highways in the United States. In addition to that, parallel to the high-speed rail, there is a Santa Fe Amtrak line that in many places only has 1 track. Why don't you use that money to make 3 6-lane modern freeways north and south, or fix the Amtrak so that trains can go on the entire distance in both directions? Gap, your plan to deal with 500,000 homeless people. Gavin, you're $3.4 billion short on Medi-Cal. Why are you allotting money year after year for people who are here illegally? Do you know that shortens community, tax-paying citizens of California? Gavin, can I ask you another question, Gavin? Why do we have the highest income taxes at 13.3%, and we're rated up almost in the bottom 5% of high school and grammar school test scores? Gavin, why are 1/3 of all welfare recipients living in your state? Gavin, why is those below the poverty level are 20% of the population? Gavin, why are 20% of PG&E power users, the largest utility in California, not paying their bills? Why are those bills 80% higher than most states? Just ask these questions. And don't let him just say, well, I think biological males are wrong in women's sports. Okay, what are you going to do about it? Why is your state resisting the NCAA? And the answer is he's not going to do anything about it because he's a captive of an insane legislature that is a result of, on the one hand, DEI, people who say they're DEI, and the other is wealthy left-wing people from San Diego to Berkeley who are fueled by an economy that's medieval, based on $9 trillion in Silicon Valley, Apple, Google, Facebook, etc. NVIDIA, that's where the money comes from. And it's a medieval state. It looks great when you go to Palo Alto. Boy, I mean, that doesn't even look great in Palo Alto. If you go to Los Altos or walk through Menlo Park, it still looks pretty good. You come down here to Fowler, Sanger, Fresno, Stockton, Delano. It's a different world, especially out in the country outside the cities. That's the real California.
Well, you just riffed off a column there, Victor.
I've written too many of them.
Yeah,
but
it's good.
Nothing changes because people vote for these people, and they're going to have something in store because the EPA under Lee Zeldin's done a heroic job in clearing the mess out of Pacific Palisades. But they're going to, and then they can talk all they want about waiving coastal commission requirements and all that, but they're going to deal with the people they voted in, and they have an agenda, and that's let's remake this exclusive, largely white and Asian enclave into a community for the people with high rises and bus services and no parking, etc. That's what they're going to dream of. You wait.
Yeah, well, they like making 7, 10-story ghettos. It's part of the leftist.
The people who like that, remember, are the people who are living in $50 million homes on the beach, about 5 miles away.
Well, Victor, as we conclude here, we have lots of listeners who catch this on Apple. They can rate the show 0 to 5 stars, and practically everyone gives you 5 stars. They leave comments. We read them. People leave comments now on Rumble, where we're now appearing. I've got 2. One is from Interocitor, who writes, I love seeing VDH on Rumble. I also love seeing him smile on the show.
I was smiling a lot more until this stupid flu.
Yeah, well, it makes me feel like things are going in the right direction. So to remind Eeyore of that. And then there's another interesting comment by Dovie12, DOVIE12. Hey, Victor, you mentioned we needed a sheriff to run for governor.
Yes, I did.
Have you heard of Chad Bianco? He's in the race. So I looked up a little. Chad Bianco, it has announced he is
he an LA County sheriff?
Riverside County.
Riverside, yeah, I have heard of him.
Yeah, he announced on February 17th he's a Republican. So maybe the cavalry's coming, or the sheriff anyway.
It's we need something so desperately. I see things. I was driving to town the other day, and I see things. I'll just give you, before we leave, a little synopsis of my drive into town. I won't mention the town. I go in to mail letters at the post office box. A bicycle is coming the other direction toward me, and I don't know why he would want to stop at the mail in the alleyway. You put in the. And now they become theft-proof so that people can't put the little hangers down in, and pull with gum and pull out letters they had been doing. I had lost a lot of letters that way.
Fishing, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this guy comes toward me, and he has a gold skull mask on. He has long hair, and he's riding his bike, and it was between a storm, and I thought, you know what? I know you're sick, but you're not hallucinating. So he stops. And I rolled down the other window, and I said, could I help you? But he had a skull. He was a skull riding. So then I get back in, and I drive.
Oh, he didn't say anything to you?
No. He just stopped. And I thought, well, should I stay here and see if he's curious about the 5 bills I just paid or not? And then I go over to a bank. I won't mention the bank. And of course, the ATM doesn't work. And then I do the drive-in, and that is out. So then I think, well, I got to go pick up some groceries. So I go to get my cart that's outside the grocery store, and I notice the first 6 have napkins, shopping literature in it, newspapers,
debris.
So I pull out 6 of them, and then I get another one, and then I go in, and it's very, I'm there, and then I get in line and the person ahead of me has everything separated, like little separations, like beer here, candy here, and then these
Right.
are like $20, $30, $40, and then the big, huge cart comes, and then it's exasperation that the first two EBT cards are not working.
Of course.
And so I'm waiting, and then when you're in a world like that, you want to be hyper legal. So I was parked way away from all this. I always park away because about 6 months ago, I was there, and a person who looked like they had a nice card came in, and another person claimed that they had hit them and was, you know what I mean, that scam, and wanted money from this other person. So I just parked my car, which is not the nicest car by any means. So I just park it way distant. So anyway, and I always park my my shopping cart. I take it all the way back and put it in where it's supposed to be. And the poor person was there. He was so nice. He said, "Thank you so much. I wish everybody did this." But the final thing I said is that when you check out, the checker walks behind the counter with a little code gun and reads the barcode on your shopping cart, because I guess you've used a credit card when you paid, so they know who you are, and then that barcode is not. So then when I drive through the country home, my 2 mile, I see their cards on the side of the road in a ditch. So they're trying to stop the theft, but they have to record every single one. And then as I was driving this way yesterday along, I won't name the avenue, I noticed this car. I'm going about 45, 50, and there's a car going about 10 miles an hour, about a mile ahead of me. And then it pulls over, so I slowed down. And the person is opening the trunk, and that means he's going to unload all of these, trash. But then I slowed down, and didn't get next to him parallel. So then he walks out and looks around, and then he closes his trunk because I had my phone. I was going to take a picture of his license plate, and then he puts on. And at that point, I said I did my duty, but as I turned left on my street, I looked down and he was pulled over again. That was just like a typical 20-minute, 30-minute odyssey. I felt like I was dealing with a Lystragonian, Cyclops, Circe, Calypso trying to get home. I really did. And that's
another day in California. Yeah,
that is California now.
I thought it was where bowers and flowers bloom in the spring.
No, that's California now. And I really feel for, there was a guy there who, a Mexican-American guy who works for a farmer I know. He's a genius. He can put a conduit under 50 feet of asphalt with he knows how to take pipe sections and put water hydraulic and drill a hole right through and thread. He's amazing. And he came up to me and we were talking about everything and how hard it was to farm in California and everything. And people, they all know it's not working. They all know it's completely dysfunctional, dangerous society. And I won't mention, one last thing is there's a very famous medical center in California, not here, but it's one of the most famous. And I had a former relative, son-in-law, went in for a routine procedure, sciatica, and died in the recovery room. I had another friend from high school who went 6 months earlier for a heart valve. The surgery was successful. Came back the next day and didn't wake up. I had another person say they just had a medical procedure there. It was the same thing. And what I'm getting at is that when your educational system is 45th in the nation, and your UC and CSU systems have been non-meritocratic, and you have been admitting people at your stellar universities not on meritocratic criteria for a number of years, and you are running a huge deficit and $77 billion to start this year, you're starting to see the breakdown of an inherited society which the present generation is not able to sustain. And that can be roads, high-speed rail, reservoirs, the California Water Project, crime, homelessness, routine petty theft. Oh, by the way, one last thing, I'll shut up. That same place where I went to get food, I was checking out, and all of a sudden, this guy, they have a security area, you know, where you watch the customers. That guy's in there with the TVs and stuff. And all of a sudden, this guy is very strange looking ahead of me, right? And he's got a kind of a trench coat and everything. And this guy bounds out of the security thing and grabs him by the neck. And I thought, wow, this is just some kind of gang fight or something. But the security guy was really good. And he said, empty it.
Yeah. Oh, he had 20 steaks.
Yes. I mean, you should have seen what came out. I mean, there was everything that came out of his coat and pockets. And then he grabbed him by the neck and he said, I said something to the effect, are you going to arrest him? And the checker was watching. He said, no, so he escorted him out. And then the guy wouldn't leave. And so he got pretty rough with him. And he said, get out of here. And I guess they didn't get the message that it's no longer legal to steal $950.
Right. Yeah.
And merchandise. We repealed that. I thought we did. But that's just a day in the life of stuff. And it's that way.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that 40 years ago, 30 years ago. I don't know what
Sounds like
went
you
wrong.
need, who's the sheriff from Walking Tall? What, Bradford, Pusser, or Puser?
It's a liberal
You need
progressive
that.
ideology. It's a nihilist ideology. It destroys everything it touches.
Yeah.
And then the worst thing about all this is that then you go to the university and you read things written and the generations that created the state, multiracial generations who they built this wonderful airports, freeways, California Water Project, Glenn Dumke and the tripartite, UC, CSU, Community College plan, everything.
Made the desert
about it.
bloom. Yeah.
They did everything. And they
Yeah.
were such great people. And all you hear is denigration and that they were polluters and they destroy their dams, they destroy their aqueducts, they can't. And yet, those people had more intelligence and competence in their little finger than all the Gavin Newsoms in the world.
Well, again,
child of privilege, inherited privilege, smug, boutique left-wing politics, and never subject to the consequences of his own ideology. I wish he was.
Ingratitude, Victor, ingratitude. I just need to mention, I write Civil Thoughts, a free weekly email newsletter for the Center for Civil Society, and it comes out every Friday and it has 14 recommended readings. I know you're going to like it. Go to civilthoughts.com, sign up. We're not selling your name. It's nothing transactional about it. I really do believe you will enjoy it. Thanks for those who do subscribe and who write me. And thanks everyone who took the time to leave comments. Victor's website, Rumble, Apple, wherever. Victor, you've been terrific. You're indestructible. Keep being indestructible.
I am not indestructible.
We will all to dust
on Monday,
we shall return.
In
someday.
24 hours, I go on Mr. Toad's Great Adventure.
the wild ride again.
I've noticed that one thing happens when you've had the flu and you're trying to get over it. I'm not infectious anymore, but when I've done this before, one or two things happens. Either you see a different climate that's warmer and you force yourself to think you're perfectly, and you get well, or you get run down and you get stranded somewhere worse. But you have to have an upbeat, optimistic point of view.
I hope your plane lands where it's supposed to. You're not rerouted to Gary, Indiana, or St. Louis or something.
I know that's happened to me places a lot.
Yeah.
Or catches fire at the dock, like the one in Colorado.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Well, safe travels, St. Christopher. Go with Victor. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.